Southern Oregon's picturesque landscapes are absolutely undeniable, but is the reality of living here as idyllic as the Instagram posts? Hey everyone, I'm Simona and welcome to Living Southern Oregon. Now, this area has a lot going on for it, but there are also many things that are not so great. Now, some of these things may not be an issue for you, but some will, and I think it's important to know the reality of living here, especially if you're planning a move here. All right, let's start with healthcare. Now, this is especially important for retirees or those with health issues needing extra care, and we do see a lot of retirees moving to the area. Now, overall, the winner in our area for healthcare is Asante. They generally get better ratings overall, but they got into some serious trouble in 2023. One of their Grants Pass nurses was injecting ICU patients with tap water instead of fentanyl, causing several deaths. Now they're dealing with a big old lawsuit. Now, in reading reviews from patients and staff, it seems like things aren't going as well as they used to, with people complaining about staffing issues and overall care going downhill. So we're going to just have to see how things shape up over the coming months and years for Asante. But I still think it's important to keep in mind that they are one of the best rated hospitals in the area. Now, in regards to staffing, this is an issue that just about every hospital and doctor's office in Southern Oregon faces. It's very hard to attract quality providers to the Rogue Valley because it's just not as desirable to live here as it is in a bigger city. We're remote, so we kind of get who we get, and sometimes that's great and sometimes not so much. And because there's a lack of providers, this means it's going to take a while to get an appointment, especially if it's anything specialized. Now, people often find themselves waiting months for an appointment or having to drive long distances just to get to a provider who has an earlier availability. Some examples: I personally have driven to Roseburg just to get an earlier appointment with a skin specialist, and my daughter had to wait 4 months to see her new MD just to establish care. All right. If you're living in a more rural area or in Grants Pass, you might need to drive to Medford as well for your health care. So all of this to say, do your own research and make sure you can get the type of care you need for you and your family. All right, another downside to living in Southern Oregon, in my opinion, is the lack of diversity. Now, I've said this before, all of Southern Oregon is predominantly white. Now, there are about 15% Latinos and Hispanics, which is great, and that population is growing. Now, the state of Oregon has had a pretty negative history when it comes to racism, as it was once a KKK stronghold, and some of that nasty juju has just trickled into 2025. Now, remember, Grants Pass was the last town in Oregon to remove its sundown laws sometime in the early 70s. Ridiculous. And I've heard anecdotal stories of racist signage along the I-5 as late as the 80s. Now, in my opinion, that's a downside to living here. I believe diversity is something we should all want in a community because it broadens our personal horizons and it helps us understand each other as humans. So it is my hope that this will continue to change, because it is changing, and that we're going to see a lot more diversity in the coming years. Now, another downside to the lack of diversity is the lack of interesting food. So if you're coming from a bigger city and you're expecting to find an amazing banh mi sandwich or really good Korean barbecue, think again. All right, another downside to living in Southern Oregon is the job market and the overall poverty. Now, most jobs are entry-level, minimum wage type jobs, and many people who move here, they do so really successfully by securing remote work. So if you're planning to move here, be sure and take the job market into consideration and plan accordingly. Depending on which town you decide to live in, you may find yourself driving a long distance to get to work. And remember, public transportation here sucks, so you can pretty much count on driving. All right, because the job market isn't ideal, there are many families living below the poverty line. This translates into families struggling with food and housing insecurity, which means you have a lot of kids struggling to keep up in school, which means the overall academics in Oregon are not great. Now, in Southern Oregon, same thing. Oregon is rated 45th out of 50 when it comes to education. So yeah, that's a downside of poverty. Also, when people are struggling financially, it often leads to substance abuse and crime, and we see our fair share of that here in Southern Oregon. Now, does this mean that every school sucks and there's a ton of drugs and crime everywhere? No, but it does mean these are issues Southern Oregon faces. So do your research, decide which towns and which part of towns work best for you and your family. All right, there you have it. This is my honest take on living in Southern Oregon. So while the area has its challenges, it still has a lot to offer, otherwise I wouldn't be here. All right, if you're considering a move to Southern Oregon, I hope this video has given you a better sense of what to expect. And if you have more questions about the area or you're planning to move here, please give me a call. I would be happy to help. I can be reached at 541-326-2552. All right, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. All right, I will see you next time.